So, what if I told you that back in the 19th, a wealthy real estate mogul literally tried to build his own country from scratch? I'm talking about declaring independence, printing money, issuing passports, the whole 9 yards. And get this, he almost pulled it off. This isn't some crazy fantasy or movie plot. This actually happened. And the story of what went wrong, well, it's wilder than you'd think. Before we dive into this incredible tale of ambition, politics, and tons of money, make sure you hit that subscribe button because trust me, you're not going to want to miss how this whole thing ends. Alright, let's get into it. The Dreamer. So our story starts with a guy named Michael Oliver. Now, Michael wasn't your typical billionaire. You know, while other rich guys were buying yachts and fancy cars, Michael had a completely different obsession. He wanted to create the perfect society. And I mean, he really believed he could do it. This wasn't just some rich guy's hobby. Oliver was convinced that existing governments were, well, basically broken. Too much regulation, too many taxes, too much bureaucracy. Sound familiar? So in the late 1960s, Oliver starts floating this wild idea. What if, instead of trying to fix the system from within, you just started over? What if you could build a country from the ground up, with minimal government, maximum freedom, and zero interference? Now, here's the thing. Most people would just daydream about this stuff. But Michael Oliver, he had something most dreamers don't have. Serious money. We're talking millions and millions of dollars from his real estate empire. The plan. Okay, so Michael's got the cash and the vision. But you can't just plant a flag in someone's backyard and declare independence. Right. Well, actually, that's pretty much exactly what he tried to do. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Find some unclaimed territory, somewhere no other country really cares about, and just build a nation there. So Oliver and his team start scouring the globe for the perfect spot. And eventually, they find it. A tiny coral reef in the South Pacific, about 400 miles southwest of Tonga. The locals called it Minerva Reef. But here's the catch. It was barely above water at high tide. But Michael saw potential. You know how they say location in real estate? Well, this location was perfect. It was technically in international waters, which meant no existing government had a clear claim to it. Plus, it was small enough that a private group could actually afford to develop it. The plan was to literally build up the reef, create artificial land, and establish what they called the Republic of Minerva. They'd have their own constitution, their own currency, their own government, a libertarian paradise in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The money starts flowing, so here's where things get really interesting. Oliver doesn't just throw his own money at this project. No. He's way smarter than that. He creates something called the Phoenix Foundation, and he starts raising funds from other wealthy libertarians who share his vision. And believe it or not, people actually bought into this. We're talking about serious investors, putting down serious cash. The foundation raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, which back in the 1970s, that was real money. But here's what's wild. Oliver wasn't just some dreamer throwing money into the ocean. He actually had a legitimate plan. They hired engineers, they studied ocean currents, they researched international law. This wasn't some half-baked scheme. The foundation even published detailed reports about how the Republic of Minerva would work. They designed a constitution that limited government power. They planned a gold-backed currency. They even figured out how to handle defense and foreign relations. Operation Republic, alright? So it's 1971, and Michael Oliver decides it's time to stop talking and start building. He charters a ship, loads it up with sand and construction equipment, and heads out to Minerva Reef. Now, picture this scene. You're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There's basically nothing around you for hundreds of miles, and you're dumping tons of sand onto a coral reef, trying to create land where none existed before. The crew worked for months, building up the reef, creating what they called Minerva Island. And you know what? It actually worked. They created about 6 acres of dry land, built a small tower, and on January 19, 1972, they did it. They declared independence. The Republic of Minerva was officially born. They raised their flag. They issued a Declaration of Independence. They even started printing their own money. For a brief moment, Michael Oliver's crazy dream was actually reality. The neighbors weren't happy, but here's the thing about creating your own country. Other countries tend to notice, and they don't always appreciate it. The Kingdom of Tonga, which was the closest actual nation to Minerva Reef, was not happy about this new neighbor. King Taufaha Tupufo basically said, "Nope, not happening in my backyard." Now, you might think, what's Tonga gonna do? It's a tiny island nation with barely any military. But here's what Oliver and his team didn't count on. International politics. Tonga didn't just complain. They went to the United Nations, they rallied other Pacific nations, and they made a very compelling argument. Basically, they said, if we let rich foreigners just create countries wherever they want, what's to stop them from taking over the entire Pacific? And you know what? Other countries listened. Australia, New Zealand, Fiji. They all supported Tonga's position. Suddenly, Michael Oliver's little republic was facing opposition from half the Pacific. The invasion. So here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. On June 21, 1972, just 5 months after declaring independence, the Kingdom of Tonga launched what they called a recovery operation. Now, calling it an invasion might be a bit dramatic, but that's essentially what it was. Tongan forces landed on Minerva Island, tore down the flag, destroyed the facilities, and formally annexed the territory to Tonga. The Republic of Minerva's entire population at the time, maybe 12 people. Their military, 0. Their ability to resist, basically none. And just like that, Michael Oliver's dream country was over. After months of planning, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and years of legal preparation, the Republic of Minerva lasted exactly 148 days. The legal battles, but Michael Oliver wasn't the type to give up his. If he couldn't defend his country militarily, maybe he could do it legally. So the Phoenix Foundation launched a massive legal campaign. They filed lawsuits, they appealed to international courts, they argued that Tonga had no right to claim territory that was clearly in international waters. And you know what? They actually had a point. Legally speaking, Tonga's claim to Minerva Reef was pretty shaky. The reef was well outside Tonga's territorial waters, and there was no clear precedent for this kind of annexation. But here's the thing about international law. It's complicated, and it turns out having the law on your side doesn't mean much if you don't have the political support to enforce it. The legal battles dragged on for years. Tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, countless court filings, and in the end, nothing. The Republic of Minerva remained dead, and Minerva Reef remained part of Tonga. Where did the money go? So here's the question everyone was asking. What happened to all that money? The Phoenix Foundation had raised hundreds of thousands of dollars from investors who believed in the dream of Minerva. Some of it, obviously, went into the actual construction. Moving all that sand and equipment to the middle of the Pacific Ocean wasn't cheap. The legal battles ate up a huge chunk too, but investigators later found that a significant portion of the funds had been spent on what you might call administrative expenses, travel costs, consulting fees, salaries for foundation staff. Now, was this fraud? That's debatable. Oliver and his team weren't living lavishly off investor money, but they also weren't exactly running a tight ship. For a project that was supposed to create a minimal government paradise, the Phoenix Foundation sure had a lot of overhead. The second attempt, but here's what's really wild about Michael Oliver. Failure didn't stop him. In fact, it barely slowed him down. Just a few years after the Minerva debacle, Oliver was back with another plan. This time, he set his sights on a place called the Abaco Islands in the Bahamas. The idea was similar but different. Instead of building artificial land, Oliver wanted to help the Abaco Islands secede from the newly independent Bahamas and create their own nation. The Abacos had a large population of white who were UN thrilled about being governed by the black majority government in Ness. Oliver saw an opportunity to create his libertarian paradise, while also supporting what he saw as a legitimate independence movement. The Abaco scheme, so Oliver starts funneling money and resources into the Abaco independence movement. We're talking about weapons, training, political organizing, the works. The plan was for the Abacos to declare independence, and then Oliver's foundation would essentially become their main financial backer. In exchange, the new nation would implement the kind of minimal government policies that Oliver had always dreamed of. And for a while, it looked like it might actually work. The independence movement was gaining momentum. They had popular support among the white population, and they had serious financial backing. But then, just like with Minerva, international politics got in the way. The United States, which had close ties with the Bahamas, made it very clear that they would not recognize Abaco independence. Britain, which still had interests in the region, opposed it too. The collapse without international support. The Abaco independence movement collapsed. Oliver's money couldn't buy legitimacy, and without legitimacy, you can't really create a country. But the fallout was even worse than Minerva. Some of the weapons and training that Oliver had provided ended up being used in criminal activities. The whole thing became a massive scandal, and Oliver found himself under investigation by multiple governments. The Phoenix Foundation's reputation was in tatters. Investors who had already lost money on Minerva were now facing the possibility that their Abaco investments were linked to illegal activities. The final legacy. So what happened to Michael Oliver after all this? Well, he kept trying. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, he continued to promote various seasteading and nation-building projects, but none of them ever got off the ground. The failures of Minerva and Abaco had made investors wary, and governments around the world were now alert to these kinds of schemes. Oliver died in 2007, still believing in his vision of creating the perfect society, but never having achieved it. The total amount of money that went into Oliver's various projects, estimates range from $1 to $5 million, which in today's money would be worth tens of millions. The modern legacy. But here's the thing. Michael Oliver's dream didn't die with him. His ideas have inspired a whole new generation of libertarians and entrepreneurs who are still trying to create independent nations. You've got seasteading projects like the ones backed by PayPal founder Peter Thiel, entrepreneurs trying to create virtual nations. You've got people buying private islands and declaring independence, and in a weird way, some of Oliver's ideas have actually been proven right. We now have tax havens, free economic zones, and charter cities that implement many of the policies he advocated for. The difference is, modern nation builders have learned from Oliver's mistakes. Instead of trying to create countries from scratch, they work within existing legal frameworks. Instead of fighting governments, they partner with them. The question remains, so was Michael Oliver a visionary ahead of his time, or just a wealthy dreamer who wasted other people's money? The truth is, probably somewhere in between. His basic insight, that existing governments are often inefficient and oppressive, wasn't wrong. His belief that you could create better societies with the right incentives and structures, that wasn't crazy either. But Oliver made a fundamental mistake. He thought that having money and good intentions was enough to create a country. He underestimated the power of politics, international relations, and simple human nature. You can't just opt out of the world system. No matter how much money you have, countries exist because other countries recognize them, and recognition is about politics, not engineering projects. The final equation. So what's the real lesson of Michael Oliver's story? Maybe it's that changing the world is harder than it looks, even when you have millions of dollars to throw at the problem. Or maybe it's that some dreams are worth pursuing, even if they fail. The Republic of Minerva lasted 148 days, but the ideas behind it are still influencing people 50 years later. The money that went into Oliver's projects, was it wasted? Well, the investors certainly didn't get their money back. The Republic of Minerva is gone. The Abaco independence movement failed, but the dream of creating better societies, more efficient governments, more free communities, that dream is still alive, and maybe that's worth something. If this story got you thinking about the power of money, politics, and big dreams, let me know in the comments. Do you think someone could actually pull off what Michael Oliver tried to do, or are some dreams just too big for reality? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the fascinating people who tried to change the world, succeeded or failed, because sometimes the most interesting stories are about the ones who dared to try something impossible. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the biggest failures teach us the most about what's actually possible.